Hey everyone, in this video we're going to talk about rotation constraints, what they are, how to set them up, and how to animate with them. If you'd like to follow along, there's a link to the source file in the video description. You can either download the file or use the open in Rive button if you just want to go into the file and poke around. With that being said, let's hop into it. Okay, so we've got our Jeep example here, and let's first talk about what a rotation constraint does. A rotation constraint allows us to tell a constraint owner to copy the specific property of a target object. So in this case, we're going to be using rotation constraints. Now our wheels, front wheel and back wheel, are going to be our constraint owners, and our wheel control is going to be our target object. So our wheels are going to copy the rotation of our target object here. So let's actually set one up and see how it works. So I'm going to start with the front wheel. Ooh, let me fix the rotation of that. So we're going to start with the front wheel. I'm going to add a rotation constraint and use this target button here to define what target this constraint should follow. So in this case, we're going to use this wheel control group here. And now everything's set up. So when I rotate this target group, you can see that our wheel is rotating as well. Now, let's go and look at some of these settings really quickly. We're not going to adjust any in this example, but we will in the next one. So we've got our name, which obviously we can rename our constraint. We've got our strength, which just tells our constraint owner how strictly it should adhere to the target object. And we've already used the target button. And then we've got our different spaces that we can change from world to local. And then we've got our offset toggle here. Now the offset toggle, when it's toggled off, we can't rotate our constraint owner. But when we have it toggled on, we can rotate that freely. So we will need to use that in the next video or in the next example. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. And then we've got our copy, which is very similar to strength. The main difference is that strength is an animatable property and copy is not. We've also got our min and max, which allows you to define a range at which your constraint works. So if I have my min set at 0 and my max set at like 90 degrees, if I rotate this this target, you can see that the constraint only works between 0 degrees and 90 degrees. Once we get past 90 degrees, our wheel's not turning anymore until we rotate all the way back around to 360, and we're essentially back at 0 degrees, and it'll pick up where it left off until we get back to 90. Okay, so we're not going to be using min or max, so we can uncheck those. So let's finish this example and move on to the next one. So to finish this up, I'm just going to add a new constraint here. Add a rotation constraint and target that wheel control. And now you can see we've got both wheels rotating just using a single target here. Now, it may not be obvious why you'd want to set it up in this example, because you probably could just grab the front and back wheel and rotate it, but we like to save keys wherever possible. So setting up a rotation constraint here makes sense. All right, so let's hop into our next example and get a little bit deeper into the constraint. Okay, so here's the heart machine, and what we're going to be doing with this is very similar to what we did with the Jeep, but we're going to need to tweak some of those values to get things working. As you can see, we've got a lot of different gears here that we want to rotate, and we're going to want to rotate them at different speeds and in different directions, and we're going to do all of that using a single control. In addition to that, we've also got our wings on both sides, and each wing has a number of different feathers, and we want to actually rotate those out together. And again, we're going to do that with a single control. So we've got a control for the wings and a control for the gears. So let's start by setting up the gears. So we'll start with these top two here. And with gear 1 on this left side, I'm just going to go ahead and set it up like we did with the Jeep tire. So I'm just going to use the target button and target our gear control. So when I rotate that, obviously the gear is going to rotate along with it. All right, so let's set up the gear 2 here. I'm going to add that rotation constraint and hit the target. And now when I rotate it, you can see that they're both rotating in the same direction. Now we don't want that. We want one gear to rotate clockwise and another to rotate counterclockwise. So we're going to use the strength setting in our constraint to adjust that. Now, right now, we're at a strength of 100. So to get it to rotate in the opposite direction at the same speed as our other gear, we're just going to change this to negative 100. And now when we rotate this, you can see that both of our gears are rotating at the same pace and going in opposite directions. Now, we've got one more problem we need to address. You can see that the teeth are actually bumping into each other, and what we need is those teeth to actually interlock with each other. So to do that, we're going to go to gear 1, toggle the offset toggle, and just go ahead and rotate that just slightly so that the gear teeth will actually interlock. So now when we rotate our control, you can see that those gears are actually interlocking now. So that's exactly what we want. All right, so let's move on and get these gears at the bottom hooked up. So we'll just start here at the top with gear 5. I'm going to add a rotation constraint. Go ahead and target our gear control. And I actually want this gear to rotate a little bit slower than the gears up top. So I'm going to change the strength to 50%. And now you can see that it's rotating just a little bit slower than the gears at the top here are. All right, so I'm going to continue doing this all the way through for the rest of the gears. I'm going to leave that one at 100. I want these gears to be moving at different rates. So I'm just going to change that strength value as I go here. Just making sure that I've got some rotating clockwise, some rotating counterclockwise. So in this next one, this next one's actually really small. So I want it to rotate even faster than everything else. So I'm going to go with 150% strength. Let's see. This one, since this is going clockwise, I'll make this one go counterclockwise. That. And then we've got our last gear here. Just finish adding this constraint in, and we'll just leave it at the default settings. And let's take a look at this. Okay, so there you go. We've got gears rotating at different speeds and in different directions. So we're all set up with our gears. Now the next thing we need to do is set up the wings. Now we're going to do something very similar with the wings. The left wing is going to be set up almost in the exact same way as our gears here. But what we're going to do is make sure we're targeting our wing group control there. And as I go down these wings, I'm going to remove just a little bit of that strength from each one. So the first one was at 100, so I'm going to bump this down to 95. Do another one here, and I'm going to bump this down to 90. So I'm just taking away 5% of the strength for every feather as we get closer and closer to the base. Make sure I got the right one there. Let's see. So we're at 100, 95, 90. This needs to be 85. And then this last one needs to be at 80. Okay, so we've got this side set up. Let's go ahead and test it out. So you can see everything's rotating nicely, but this little feather right here is not quite rotating exactly how I want it. So I'm going to remove just a little bit more of the strength here. And that looks pretty good. Okay, so the left side is set up. Now, for the right side, we're going to have to change a couple more settings here. And the reason for that is when I created the left side, I did it all normal. To create the right side, I duplicated this group and applied a negative X scale to it. So you'll see what happens when we try to just go through the same steps and apply our rotation constraints the exact same way as we did on the left side. So let's start with the first feather here. Add that rotation constraint. And I'm going to target my wing group. Now you can see that the top feather has sort of rotated all the way around and is pointing in the same direction as this one. And that's because of that negative scale value. So to fix that, what we're going to do is change the destination space from world to local. So now it's completely ignoring that negative scale. And you can see that the rotation is working just how we want it to. So sometimes you have to just tweak some of those source settings until you find the right one that works the best for you. So let's continue down and just go ahead and apply the same weighting that we did on the same strength values that we did on the left side to the right side here. So I'm going to go through here and just add all my constraints. And remember to change the destination space and change that strength, reduce it by 5 for every wing in the group as we go down. Let's see, so we're at 90 here. This one needs to be 85. And then we'll get to this bottom one, and I think we put that at 75, I believe. We can check it if I'm not sure. Okay. 80? No, we did 75. That's right. Okay, let's double check this and make sure it's working correctly. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we're all rigged up. We've got our rotation constraints set, and especially in this example, you can really see why we'd want to use our constraints, because if we didn't, we'd have a bunch of different keys for our gears here as we rotate those, and then the same thing for our wings. So you can see why setting up a rotation constraint can be really helpful, especially in a situation like this. So we're all rigged up and we're ready to jump into animate mode and get these things animated. So let's do that now. Okay, so we're going to start by animating the Jeep first, because that's the first one that we actually rigged up. And what we're going to do is make a simple driving animation. So to do that, we're going to use the wheel control that we set up. And we're going to start by keying the initial rotation at the beginning of the timeline, going to the end of the timeline, and setting a key for one complete rotation, so 360 degrees. Let's go ahead and change our our playback type from one shot to loop and take a look at that. So the wheels look pretty nice, but to make the drive a little more interesting, let's have that Jeep chassis sort of bounce up and down as it's going. So to do that, if you notice here in the hierarchy, I have a group for the Jeep, which is all of the artwork, and then I've got my front wheel, back wheel, and the body. So I've got that chassis detached so I can actually bounce it up and down. So I'm going to key the initial Y position, go forward 10F on the timeline, bounce it down just a little bit, and then return it to its original position like 10 milliseconds later, so at 20F. Now I'm just going to copy this little loop here that we created and paste it until it's all the way across the timeline like so. And then I'm just going to add in cubic easing, and we can take a look at that. Okay, so our Jeep looks pretty good. It's bouncing up and down. We've got it driving along, but it looks like it's stuck in the same spot. So to fix that, we can animate the background. Now we're going to need a little more time on the timeline because, well, let's just start over here. Okay, so we're going to start by animating the Jeep because that was the first one that we rigged up. So to do this, we're going to start by, no. Okay, so we're going to animate the Jeep here first because that's the first one that we rigged up. And we're just going to make a simple driving idle animation. So to do that, let's start with the wheel control and get our wheels moving here. So I'm going to key the initial rotation at the beginning of the timeline. And go to the end of the timeline and set a key for 360 degrees or one complete rotation. Now let's change the back type from one shot to loop because this is going to be a looping animation, and just go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so our wheels look pretty good, but let's add a little bit of bounce in the Jeep to make it a little bit more interesting. So at the beginning of the timeline, I'm going to grab my body group here, which has all the artwork for the Jeep chassis. And just go ahead and key the initial Y position. And go forward like 10 milliseconds. And we can go down with it. I'm going to go down here, just like that. And then return it back to original position a little ways down the timeline. Okay, so we've got ourselves a little bouncing loop here that we created. So I'm going to take this loop and just duplicate it until we've got that loop going all the way across our timeline. And select all the keys and throw on some cubic easing, and now we can take a look at that. Okay, so the Jeep itself looks good, but it looks like it's stuck in one spot. So to fix that, we can animate the background moving to actually give the sense that the Jeep is moving forward. So let's start with our backgrounds here. I've got two background layers. Let me zoom out a little bit and show you how these are set up. So we've got this first background layer, and all I've done is created a sort of a loopable piece of artwork. So I've got a single hill here, and then I've got a double hill, and then I duplicated that. So here's the single hill again, and the double hill over here. So what I can do to create an easy background loop is just start the artwork on the left side here, lined up with the left side, or start with this lined up with the left side of the artboard, and go to the end of the timeline and drag it to where that same single hill there, which is this one, is once again lined up with the left side of the artboard. Now we can take a look at that and see how that looks. Okay, so we've got a nice loop going, but I think our background's moving a little too fast. So let's extend the timeline and fix up the animation. So I'm going to give myself 3 seconds to work with, and then just expand the timeline so I can see everything. And I'm going to grab the background and wheel control and move those to the end of the timeline. Now, our wheel's going to be rotating a little too slow now. Yeah, see, it's moving too slow because it's only doing a single loop. So let's add in a couple more rotations here to this wheel control. So instead of 360 degrees, I'm going to make it rotate 3 complete times. So we're going to do 1080 degrees, and that should get our wheels going fast enough, which it looks like they are. And I think the background's moving at about the right pace. Now I need to extend this this bouncing loop here, so I'm just going to copy those and once again just paste them until we've got them going all the way down to the end of the timeline. Let's take a look at that. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we've also got this second background layer here that we can animate to create sort of a parallaxing effect. So to do that, I'm just going to line up the center or the single hill here in between these front two, and then go to the end of the timeline and drag this over and make sure I do the same thing. Just line that next single hill up in between these two hills. So let's take a look at that and make sure everything looks okay. All right, that looks like we've got a nice looping animation. We don't have any hitching or anything like that. So I think we're done with this example, and we can hop into that heart machine and get it animated. Okay, so it's time to animate our heart machine. Now, because we set up all those constraints, this animation is going to be really, really simple. What we're going to do is have the key fly in from off screen, insert into the keyhole, and rotate, and it'll unlock our heart machine and actually make the wings come out to this position here. So let's go ahead and start by getting our artwork in the correct position here. So I'm going to just rotate these wings down so that they're in the down position like so. And I'm going to take my key and move it off the artboard just like that so we can't see it. Okay, I'm going to go forward to 30F here. I'm going to move this key down and just have it positioned where I want it to be. It's like this. Okay, and now we're going to use the scale property to actually make that key rotate and look like it's inserting into the keyhole. So I'm going to expand my key here, and at the beginning of the timeline, set the initial scale, and then when it gets to here, I'm going to use that X scale to rotate the key. And you can see it's creating sort of a nice 3D effect there. So now I need to reposition the key and make sure it's in the right spot. Like that. All right, let's take a look at this and see what that looks like as it's moving in. Okay, so we've got some weird rotation stuff going on and some weird scaling. So I think what I need to do, I'm just going to remove my Y scale here and remove this rotation key, and that should fix everything. Yep, that looks pretty good. Okay, let's take a look at that in real time. That looks all right. Maybe with some easing, we can make it look a little bit better. Okay, so that looks pretty decent. Now what we need to do is when the key gets here, we're going to have it pause. So I'm going to go ahead and set the initial rotation probably 5 milliseconds after the key arrives where it needs to be. So we go 0 rotation there. And then we'll rotate it past where it needs to go. So like that. And then back to 90 degrees probably. Okay, so let's actually apply cubic to these rotation keys really quickly. Maybe even give it a little bit longer of a break there. So 10 milliseconds instead of 5. Okay, so that looks pretty good, but we've sort of run out of room on our timeline, so I'm going to go ahead and extend this to 3 seconds. And now that we have our key actually going and inserting into the keyhole and unlocking it, what we need to do is get our wings expanded and then have those gears turned to make it look like those gears are actually what's driving those wings up. So let's start with the wings here. Let's see, we've got their initial rotation keyed already. So I'm just going to scoot that over to where we're at 1 second. And then maybe let's see what it looks like when we use 1 second to make the wings go out. So let's just extend those. We want them to go past their final position. So their final position is going to be at 0 degrees. So let's go up just a little bit past that. And then 10 milliseconds later, what we'll do is have them bounce down a little bit. So just past their final position again. So we've gone up past their final position. We're going to go down past the final position. And then we're going to finally arrive at that 0 degrees position. So I'm going to change this rotation there. And let's see what that looks like. I'm going to put cubic easing on all of this. And then if it doesn't look right, we'll try and adjust it with the curves. And then if that doesn't look right, then we'll adjust the timing. Okay, maybe this can happen a little bit faster. So we'll create a slightly more explosive curve there. Nah, I still think it needs the ease in here. Let me just drag that in just a bit. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. Okay, so we've got our wings working. Now we need to use those that gear control to have the gears spin and make it look like they're actually driving the wings up. So I'm going to grab the gear control, and where our wings are starting to rotate, we will go ahead and key our initial rotation here. And do the same thing we did with the wings. So we're going to go at least 1 complete rotation. And I'm probably just going to go just past that. And then once again, maybe drag it down a little bit. And then go to their final position. Now with the gears, it doesn't quite matter what values that we're using. I know I want at least 1 complete rotation. Let's take a look at this and make sure it looks okay. and then we can adjust our rotation values. The reason it doesn't matter for these is there's not really a good point of reference for you to tell what their initial position is versus the final position. So just messing around with the values here is going to be just fine. Okay, so that actually looks pretty good. And all I'm doing, I'm just going to leave those standard cubic curves on there. Yeah, that actually looks pretty decent. So that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, make sure you leave a comment in the video description and we'll try and address those as quickly as possible. If you do actually set these files up and you do an animation with them, be sure to share it on the community. I'd love to see what you're working on, and I'll drop by and leave you a comment. So with that being said, that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have fun, and we'll see you in the next one.